Hey, it's Afel Krieger here, and after conducting about 2000 therapy sessions, the harshest lesson I've learned is that too much love is a form of abuse. So, here's the whole story. Once I was working with this client, and he was constantly on the verge of a collapse. And every time he got better, on the next session, he would appear worse than before. So I just couldn't win. And I tried everything I knew to keep him stable, to not upset him too much, to not trigger anything. But eventually, I started getting extremely anxious during the week, and I was constantly worried that he might do something drastic. And then I had an interesting dream in which he was holding a plastic green gun. And then it hit me. It was all theatrics, he was never gonna do anything drastic. And that's when I decided to completely change my attitude and be more firm and direct. And it worked because he finally started respecting me more and I saw some improvement. But unfortunately, this didn't last for long because I believe that once he sensed he couldn't fool me anymore, well, he just decided to quit. And this experience made me completely reevaluate my role and posture as a therapist and everything I learned about how to deal with clients and patients because I've never dealt with this level of theatrics and manipulation before. And it's crazy because I even lost a few nights of sleep because of that. And well, I had a few interesting realizations after it. And before we get into that, let me tell you that once you join my newsletter down below, I'll send you a free copy of my book Pistes, Demystifying Jung Psychology, in which I cover Carl Jung's whole theory, from shadow integration, dreams, active imagination, the animus and anima, the whole thing. So now getting back to our subject. Now, we live in an era in which playing the victim card and weaponizing incompetence have become common strategies to avoid taking responsibility and manipulating others. And now victimhood-based movements encourage this behavior, and that's why the lines between empathy and enabling are completely blurred. And I believe our culture has become a giant devouring mother, allowing people to remain childish and never having to deal with the consequences of their actions. And that's the perfect environment for the poor and proletarians, aka the man and woman child, to thrive. And this spills over into the therapy setting. So therapists learn they must be neutral, validate whatever the patient brings, and constantly show full acceptance. And on paper, this might look like a nice idea, but in practice, what actually happens is that you are taught to coddle your patients, see them as broken and incapable of taking responsibility for their lives. But the problem is that if you never challenge them to grow, you lose your effectiveness as a therapist and become their biggest enabler. And underneath this loving attitude lies an insidious savior complex and massive codependency. As I mentioned, when I was inexperienced, I remember being afraid to be direct and fully honest with my patients. I would give subtle hints, measure every word, and constantly try to not upset them, so I felt like they were fragile. And the result? Well, what could be resolved in one session sometimes took weeks, and sometimes I just didn't resolve anything, all because I didn't have the balls back then. And obviously, part of it was the natural lack of experience. However, I believe the deeper reason was precisely the prevailing narratives regarding therapy, which enhances the savior complex. But eventually, every therapist has to understand it's not their responsibility to fix and save anybody. Otherwise, they become smothering devouring mothers and infantilize their patients. And this is the attitude that encourages victim narratives, a lack of responsibility, and keeps their patients small. But it's even deeper than that, because this keeps them wounded and without any glimpse of healing. And that's how therapists contribute to the poor eternus problem. And that's also why therapists must resolve their need to be liked, needed, play the savior, and start being service of the truth. And of course, a therapist must cultivate empathy and compassion. But if you don't see your patient as capable of taking responsibility for their life, your love becomes abuse. And that's why I believe therapists must encourage independence and let people deal with the consequence of their actions. And instead of minimizing their pain, trying to coddle them and not upset them, We must find meaning in their suffering, evoke new perspectives, and show they're capable of dealing with it. And if they are catastrophizing or playing the victim, for instance, I must show them that and push them to go further, because I have to be their biggest believer. And to do so, I must be firm, direct, honest, challenge them to grow, and not accept their bullshit. And that's what true love and empathy are all about. But again, you can only provide it when you are secure in your identity. And if you want to learn more about how to overcome the problem of the poor Eternus, you should watch the next video.